Section 21 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 21, Chapter 14, Part 1. Inglesant remained in prison and would have thought that he had been forgotten, but that every few weeks he was sent for by the committee and examined. The committee got no new facts from him, and indeed probably did not expect to get any, but it was very useful to the Parliament party to keep him before the public gaze as a royalist and a Jesuit. It was a common imputation upon the cavaliers that they were papists, and anything that strengthened this belief made the king's party odious to the nation. He was a servant of the king's, an avowed Jesuit, and one self-condemned in the most terrible crimes. It is true he was disowned by the royal party, apparently sincerely, but the general impression conveyed by his case was favourable to the Parliament, and they therefore took care to keep it before the world. These examinations were looked forward to by Inglesant with great pleasure, the row up the river and the sight of fresh faces being such a delight to him. He was not confined to his room, being allowed to walk at certain hours in the court of the Tower, and he found a box containing a few books, a Lucretius, and a few other Latin books, probably left by some former occupant of the cell. These were not taken from him, and he read and reread them, especially the Lucretius, many times. They saved him from utter prostration and despair. They in a secret help which he acknowledged afterwards, a help which to men of his nature certainly does come upon prayer to God, to whatever source it may be ascribed. A help which in terrible sleepless hours, in hours of dread weariness of life, in hours of nervous pain more terrible than all, calms the heart and soothes the brain, and leaves peace and cheerfulness and content in the place of restlessness and despair. Inglesant said that repeating the name of Jesus simply in the lonely nights kept his brain quiet when it was on the point of distraction, being of the same mind as Sir Charles Lucas when, many times calling upon the sacred name of Jesus, he was shot dead at Colchester. More than a year passed over him. From the scraps of news he could gather from his jailer and from the soldiers in the court during his walks, he learnt that the king had been given up by the Scots, had escaped from Hampton Court, had been retaken and sent to Carisbrooke, and was soon to come to London, the man said, for his trial. It was soon after he had learnt this last news that his jailer suddenly informed him that he was to be tried for his life. Accordingly, soon after, a warrant arrived from Bradshaw, the president of the Council of State, to bring him before that body. The council sat in Essex House, and some gentlemen who had surrendered Pembroke upon terms that they should depart the country in 3 days, but accounting it base to desert their prince, and hoping that there might be farther occasion of service to his majesty, had remained in London, were upon their trial. When Inglesant arrived with his guard, these gentlemen were under examination, and one of them, who had a wife and children, was fighting hard for his life, arguing the case step by step with the lawyers and the counsel. Inglesant was left waiting in the ante-room several hours. From the conversation he overheard, the room being constantly full of all sorts of men coming and going, soldiers, lawyers, divines, he learnt that the king's trial was coming on very soon, and he fancied that his name was mentioned as though the nearness of the king's trial had something to do with his own being hurried on. It was a cold day, and there was a large fire in the anteroom. Inglesant had had nothing to eat since morning, and felt weak and faint. He wished the other examinations over, that his own might come on. His, he thought, would not take long. At last the gentlemen were referred to the council of war, to be dealt with as spies, and came out of the council chamber with their guards. The one was a plain country gentleman, and neither of them knew Inglesant, but stopping a moment in the anteroom, while the guard prepared themselves, one of them asked his name, saying he was afraid they had kept him waiting a long time. This was Colonel Eustace Powell, and Inglesant met him again when he thought he had only a few minutes to live. The council debated whether they should hear Inglesant that day, and it was now late in the afternoon, and the candles were lighted, but finally he was sent for into the council. As soon as he came to the bar, Bradshaw asked him suddenly when he saw the king last, to which he replied that he had not seen the king since Naseby Field. "You were at Naseby then?" said Bradshaw. "Yes," said Inglesant. "And you ran away, I suppose?" "Yes," said Johnny, "I ran away." "Then you are a coward as well as a traitor," said Bradshaw. "I'm not braver than other men," said Inglesant. Inglesant was then examined, more in form, but very shortly, everything he said having been said so often before. The president then told him that by his own confession he was guilty of death, and should be hanged at once if he persisted in it, but that the council did not believe his confession; indeed, had evidence and confessions from others to prove the reverse, and therefore if he persisted in his course he was his own murderer, and could hope for no mercy from God; that if he would sign the declaration which they offered him, which they knew to be true, and which stated that he had only acted under the king's orders, he should not only have his life spared, but should very shortly be set at liberty. To this he replied, that if they had evidence to prove what they said, they did not want his; that he could not put his name to evidence so contrary to what he had always confessed, and was prepared to stand by to death; that as to his fate before God, he left his soul in his hands, who was more merciful than man. To this Bradshaw replied that they were most merciful to him, and desired to save him from himself; that if he died with a lie upon his lips, from his own obstinacy and suicide. Making no answer to this, he was ordered back to the Tower, and warned to prepare himself for death. He saw clearly that their object was to bring out evidence signed by him on the eve of the king's trial, which no doubt would have been a great help to their cause. As he went back in his barge to the Tower, he wondered why they did not publish something with his name attached, without troubling themselves about his consent. As they went down the river, the darkness became denser, and the boat passed close to many other wherries, nearly running them down. The lights on the boats and the barges glimmered indistinctly, and made the course more difficult and uncertain. They shot the bridge under the mass of dark houses and irregular lights, and proceeded across the pool towards the Tower stairs. The pool was somewhat clear of ships, and the lanterns upon the wharves and such vessels as were at anchor made a clearer light than that above the bridge. As they crossed the pool, a wherry, rowed by a single man, came towards them obliquely from the Surrey side, so as to approach near enough to discern their persons, and then, crossing their bows, suffered itself to be run down before the barge could be stopped. The waterman climbed in at the bows. As his own wherry filled and went down, he seemed a stupid, surly man, and might be supposed to be either deaf or drunk. To the abuse of the soldiers and watermen he made no answer, but that he was an upriver waterman, and was confused by the lights and the current of the bridge. The officer called him forward into the stern, and as he came towards them, Inglesant knew him in spite of his perfect disguise. It was the Jesuit. He answered as many of the officer's questions as he appeared to understand, and took no manner of notice of Inglesant, who, of course, appeared entirely indifferent and uninterested. When they landed at the stairs, the waterman, with a perfectly professional manner, swung himself over the side into the water, and steadied the boat for the gentleman to land, which act the officer took as an awkward expression of respect and gratitude. As Inglesant passed him, he put his hand up for his to rest on, and Johnny felt a folded note passed into it. Without the least pause he followed the officer across the Tower wharf, and was conducted to his room. As soon as he was alone, he examined the paper, which contained these words only: "You are not forgotten. Keep on a little longer. The end is very near." It made little impression upon him, nor did it influence his after conduct, which had already been sufficiently determined upon. He expected very little help from any one, though he believed that Father St. Clair would do what he could. The Jesuit would have died himself at any moment, had his purpose required it, and he could not think that he would regard as of much importance the fall of another soldier in the same rank. He was mistaken, but he did not know it. The Jesuit, beneath his placid exterior, retained for his favourite and cleverest pupil an almost passionate regard, and would have done for him far more than he would have thought worth the doing for himself. Meanwhile Inglesant translated his words into a different language, and thought more than once that doubtless they were very true, and that though in a sense not intended, the end was very near. This took place at the beginning of December, and about a week afterwards the jailer advised Inglesant to prepare for death, for the warrant to behead him was signed, and would be put into execution that day week at Charing Cross. He immediately sent a petition to the Council of State that a priest, either of the Roman Catholic or the English Church, he was indifferent which, might be sent him. To this an answer was sent immediately that he was dying, with a lie upon his lips, and that the presence of no priest or minister could be of any use to him, and would not be granted. The same day a Presbyterian minister was admitted to him, who used the same arguments for some time without effect, representing the fearful condition that Inglesant was in as an unrepentant sinner. Inglesant began to regret that he had made any application, and this regret was increased 2 days afterwards, when a man who offered him certain proofs that he was a Roman Catholic priest was admitted and gave him the same advice, refusing him absolution and the sacrament unless he complied. Upon this Inglesant became desperate and refused to speak again. The priest waited some time and then left, telling him he was eternally lost. This was the severest trial he had yet met with, but his knowledge of the different parties in the Romish Church, and the extent to which they subordinated their religion to their political intrigues, was too great to allow him to feel it so much as he otherwise would. He resigned himself to die unassisted. He applied for an English prayer book, but this also was refused. He remembered the old monastic missals he had possessed at Westacre, and thought over all those days with the tenderest regret. The fatal morning arrived at last. Inglesant had passed a sleepless night. He had not the slightest fear of death, but excitement made sleep impossible. He thought often of his brother, but he had learned that he was in Paris alone, and even had he been in England, he felt no especial desire to see him under circumstances which could only have been intensely painful. Mary Collet he thought of night and day, but he knew it was impossible to obtain permission to see her, and he was tired of fruitless requests. He was tired and wearied of life, and only wished the excitement and strain over, that he might be at rest. It struck him that the greatest harshness was used towards him. His food was very poor, and of the smallest quantity, and no one was admitted to him, but he did not wonder at this, knowing that his case differed from any other loyalist prisoner. End of section 21.